It is now May 4th, 2024 here in Germany, and I wanted to take a look at an election that happened exactly 100 years ago. Now, normally on this channel we cover current political events in Germany, but I wanted to take a look at this election because it was very significant at the time, and I want to look and see how German politics has changed over 100 years, what has stayed the same. Now, this election that happened May 4th, 1924 was the third election in the Weimar Republic. This was the Federal Republic of Germany that was founded after the end of World War I. Before then, Germany was a constitutional monarchy. There were elections, but the power of the Reichstag was somewhat limited. So this was one of the first few elections they had in their history as a democracy, as a republic, where they could elect a parliament that elected a chancellor that had full control really over the politics and the political environment of the country. Now, many of the parties we see today were in fact at the time present, most notably the SPD, which was the largest party at the time with 20.5% was there. The DNVP is the main nationalist conservative party that represented kind of the old monarchist class, the aristocracy. It is a very right-wing political party. The Center Party is the predecessor to the CDU. It is a liberal conservative Catholic Christian conservative political party. There is, of course, the KPD, the Communist, the DVP, which is another more liberal conservative party. And then you have various groups of smaller kind of splinter parties, some or them focused on the interest of farmers, for example, others focused on the interest of certain ethnic groups. And if we take a look at the map, we can see, of course, this was a long time ago, and a lot of this territory is no longer a part of Germany, but we can see a very interesting situation here. And what's important to note is back then, the very important divide within German politics was the geographical divide in the country between what parts were Catholic and Protestant. Now, the CDU is a all Christian party, meaning it is Protestants and Catholics together. But before then, it was the Center Party, and they appealed specifically only to Catholics. And the Catholics were, of course, present in Western Germany, in Bavaria, in the south, and heavily along the Rhineland. And if you can see here, the black is the Center Party, and the light blue is their Bavarian ally, the Bavarian People's Party, which is similar to the CDU and CSU that we have today. Now, these two parties performed very well in the Catholic heartland of Germany in the south and in the west. They covered the entire areas, even in the east and some of the parts that had a heavy Polish minority or even German Catholic minority, they were able to perform well. Now, if you look at the eastern part of the country, which was heavily Protestant, we see much of it going blue, which is the German National People's Party. This was a general conservative party, in the country, and it appealed to Protestants, which were the majority. And of course, there were struggles between the Catholic minority in Germany and Bismarck in the decades prior, and the Catholics had always kind of seen themselves as a minority. And so, being a nationalist, German, patriotic person and being a Catholic, although it wasn't impossible, there was sometimes a conflict of interest there. Now, we see the results for the SPD in red and the Communist in pink or purple, and we can see that they perform well in the industrial Ruhrgebiet that the SPD is still strong in today. And of course, central Germany, we see from Lower Saxony all the way to Saxony and Thuringia, there is strong support for the Social Democrats. This is their traditional heartland. If you look in the city of Berlin, you can see kind of a similar mixed picture with the inner parts of the city going towards the communist and the outskirts going to the more conservatives. Now, this map does have some striking similarities, but I want to first take a look at the results, kind of see where things were at the time. Now, as you can see, there's a lot more political parties here than we have in the Bundestag today, and this has to do with the fact that there was no threshold, and all you needed to win seats was enough votes to get one seat. And each state had, in effect, their own political party to represent the kind of local interest. Then there was multiple political parties. There was the Nationalist Conservative DNVP. There was the Liberal Catholic Conservative Center Party. There was the German People's Party, the Deutsche Volkspartei, which was a more moderate version of the DNVP. Then you had the DDP, which was the Liberals. You had the NSFP, which was the National Socialist Freedom Movement. This was a party who had their main candidate as General Ludendorff, who, along with Hitler, led the Beer Hall Putsch in Munich. A lot of the founding Nazi Party members were not eligible to run. A lot of them were in jail. So the remaining ones were able to run under this new party at the time before the actual Nazi Party itself was unbanned later on. You have the Bavarian People's Party, which was one of the strongest kind of minority regional parties, and you have all these different colors, these different parties kind of forming a very diverse Bundes or Reichstag as it was at the time. And you can see from the picture here, it is very hard for coalitions to be formed. Now, the most likely coalitions that were formed were the kind of so-called Weimar coalition, and this was between the Social Democrats, the Liberal DDP, and the Center Party. And even though this is Catholic conservatives with kind of Social Democrat socialists, the reality was these parties were ones that supported the Republic, they supported democracy, they were against the monarchy of the past. And this was very a point of contention between the Center Party and some of the other conservative parties, especially the DNVP, which, although they tolerated the parliamentary democracy and the parliamentary system, a lot of their members and politicians were favorable to a return to the aristocratic and monarchist past. And the communists on the left, they theoretically could have been able to form an alliance with the Social Democrats, but the relations between the SPD and the KPD was completely destroyed. I mean, the communists kind of saw the Social Democrats as weak, and the Social Democrats saw the communists as too extreme. And there was some initial attempts for them to work together, but the relations just kind of kept being strained, and the SPD decided to, put themselves closer to the more liberals and conservatives that supported the democracy, and distanced themselves from the communists. And this led to problems in the future. And what you basically had was minority governments in which multiple parties would form a government. They would take the cabinet ministers, they would take the chancellery, and then another party would support them. Meaning they didn't have an official majority, but it was kind of a way to rule unofficially. It is something that usually is only used in terms of in times of crisis or times where there is a very weird constellation in the Reichstag or Bundestag, but this at the time was normal. And so one of the coalition types that was often common was the Center Party would have the chancellorship. They would form a coalition with the liberals and the other conservatives, and then the SPD would tolerate them, meaning the SPD would vote to support their bills. They would have some kind of check and control on what was passed. And a lot of these coalitions and governments did not last that long. A lot of times you would have 3 or 4 coalitions within a one electoral period, meaning if you have a 4-year term, you have an election, but within that election you have multiple people being chancellor, new governments forming, and so it was very hectic. And the actual the government at the time was from Marx, who was from the Center Party, and he had a coalition with the other conservatives and liberals that was tolerated by the SPD. And then the following coalition, of course, was with Marx again, who was also ran for the presidency and lost to Hindenburg in 1925. Now, if you take a look at the results on the map, I wanted to see how it kind of lines up to today. Now, if you look at the results for this on the left, these are the results for the 1924 election. On the right, this is the results for the CDU, SPD, and AFD at the 2021 federal election. And if we can see here, there are some differences, but there's some similarities. I mean, the CDU performs well in the south and Bavaria, and in the parts of the west and the Rhineland, and we can see that's almost the exact same as it was 100 years ago. The SPD performs very well in central Germany, Lower Saxony up here in the north. West is one of their strongholds. They did very well there. And the AFD, as we can see, performs very well in the east compared to the west. And now there is important distinction to make. The east, there are 2 east-west divides. There's the east-west divide that existed before the creation of East Germany, and that is the Protestant Catholic divide. And then there's also the new divide that has been created by the economic difference between East and West Germany, being different countries for over 40 years. And so a lot of the reason the AFD is stronger in the East is actually not because the parts are more Protestant, because that, a lot of them have become less religious. That plays a much less, greater role in politics, but it has to do more with the economic differences because of the creation of East Germany. But nonetheless, the fact that the CDU isn't as strong here does allow the AFD to somewhat grow to a stronger party than in the western parts. So we see there are some differences, there are some similarities. In East Germany, the Brandenburg, the areas around Berlin, were very conservative, and Saxony was very left-wing. Now that is the complete, opposite of what we have today. But if you look at the actual numbers themselves, we can see one thing that is a very striking difference is that the DNVP, which is colored in blue, is in second place. And this is, of course, can be kind of compared to the AFD in Germany surging to second place. The AFD is the first non-Catholic, non-Western oriented, all German conservative party that has made it this far in German politics, and they are kind of, in a way, filling up that spot that the DNVP, the DVP had in the past, because, of course, those two parties represented the old conservative parties that existed in Germany before World War I, and it's been a while since any blue conservative party has existed, that wasn't the CDU, and so the AFD, in a way, there are a lot of differences. Of course, you can't compare them exactly, they're not one for one, but in a way, it is similar, and it is interesting to see that 100 years later, we do have a blue conservative party resurging to second place. Of course, it's with the CDU in first and not the SPD. But also we see the KPD rising, the communists rising. And of course, you can't compare them exactly to Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, but the BSV does kind of pride themselves on being traditional left-wing socialists. There are some members that kind of do identify themselves as communists, and definitely more traditional ones. So you could see the rise of the BSV and the AFD as a comparison to the rise of the KPD and the DNVP back in 1924. But overall, there are, a lot of similarities when you look at it, but there are, some differences. It has changed. But this is definitely an interesting time to look at, and I just was looking at the dates, and I figured this would be interesting to do, to look at the results and what happened 100 years ago and see what has changed. And of course, when we have the next federal election, I'll look at the results, kind of contrasting it to the way it's been in the past. And there's also elections that have happened. 1928, there's presidential elections, so I think I will definitely try and cover each historical German election as we get to the actual dates, which of course will give us elections for the next several years to compare and contrast to. And of course, there's no reason, there's no meaning of this, there's no really significant importance. It's just kind of just a fun thing to do, to look at the history of where German politics was and look at how some of it's similar even 100 years later today. So I hope you all liked and enjoyed this video, and I hope you please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you for watching.